Most people treat soil like dirt, something to hold a plant up while we add chemicals. For 70 years, we have treated the American landscape like a chemistry experiment. We have tilled it, salted it, and forced it to produce, while the very foundation of our food system, the soil itself, has been dying beneath our feet.
Yeah, I started out with Natural Resources Conservation Service like a lot of employees do as a soil conservationist and a district conservationist. And in 1990, I took on a role as an area agronomist, actually in western North Dakota, headquartered out of Dickinson. And it was in that role that I was working with producers trying to control wind erosion. Primarily was a big issue that producers did not like the optics of their soil blowing away and the hazard it was creating on the highways, things like that. So they're all struggling for, how do we deal with this and still produce the crops that we want to produce? So we went from there, and NRCS to me was basically a vehicle that helped me be able to learn from farmers, from researchers, and help them along their way of figuring out, like I said, initially wind erosion, but once we realized that if we stopped doing tillage and left the residue in place, yes, that would stop the wind erosion, but then we were conserving moisture. And once we realized how well that was working, we realized we did not need to fallow anymore, which we actually never really needed to do. We moved a lot of wheat fallow systems to continuous cropping, and then we learned that we needed to diversify the crops we were growing so we didn't have issues with residue and disease and insects and etc. And eventually we began to see how the soil was changing and the water was infiltrating, the nutrients recycling, all these good things were happening, and it became something much more that we dug into and learned more about, that the soil is a biological system. It's not just a chemical and physical system. You go back to the Green Revolution. Every time I think about the Green Revolution, it makes me angry in a lot of ways, because it set us on that path of fertilizer, of irrigation, of inputs into soil is just a medium, it's just a bucket that we put all these inputs to and extract a yield out of. There was no understanding, no appreciation for how the soil was really supposed to function. And it's ironic that at almost the same time, a guy by the name of Krasilnikov, Russian, wrote a book about soil health, and it was, I got it written down, Soil Microorganisms and Higher Plants was the title of it, and it was published in 1959, or it was translated into English in 1959. So I came across that book a long time ago, and I read it. It's not easy to read, but he basically explains, here are all the organisms that are supposed to live in the soil. These are the roles that they play. This is how they integrate what they do with plants, how they are totally dependent on plants and plants are totally dependent on them, etc. He explained all of that. And that was at about the same time as the Green Revolution, and the Green Revolution got the upper hand, and Krasilnikov's stuff kind of got put on the shelf. So it's not like this information hasn't been around, for some time, but it's never been mainstream. And because the Green Revolution was so heavy into improved varieties, fertilizer, pesticides, irrigation, that's where everything went, and that's where all the money was. And nobody was really interested in listening to, oh, the soil is a biological system and you have to take care of it. It was like, oh, we don't need to do that. We got cheap fertilizer, we got cheap diesel fuel, we got irrigation water, we don't need to worry about that. And that's the word that you see in everything in modern agronomy. Insect control, weed control, disease control, 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 control. And because we have the technology that we can temporarily control some of these things, we keep doing it. Instead of realizing we're creating all of these problems. We're creating all those issues that we're now trying to control. Yeah, and when you have a healthy soil microbiome, to pick up on what you said about diseases and insects and so on and so forth, plants rely on that microbiome to pre-process nutrients, so to speak, for them and save them a lot of energy and save them from having to deal with these real simple compounds like nitrates and etc. If a plant can get its nitrogen packaged as an amino acid or something higher than just ammonia or just nitrate, they spend a lot less energy and time making their higher molecular weight compounds. So they very quickly become inedible to funguses and insects because they don't have these simple compounds. Insects, fungi, all these things, they have pretty simple systems and they aren't able to digest some of those things. So if the plant can very quickly get to those higher molecular weight compounds, the insects look at them and say, I can't eat that. I can't digest that. But for us, we have more complex digestive systems. We look at that and say, unless that plant has high molecular weight compounds, phytonutrients, it's really not nutritious to us.
And that's where nutrient density comes in, right? In those types of things.
Right, exactly. So in the systems, conventional systems with all the inputs and so on and so forth and no biology, we're growing plants that are very attractive for insects and diseases and not attractive for us to eat.
That's the easiest way to put it, And so you want to feed, the soil complex things. And that kind of brings us to this next part is, you often speak about moving from that chemistry first mindset to a biology first mindset. Can you kind of just explain what the biological powerhouse that really exists under our feet?
You grab a lump of soil that's the size of a golf ball. There's more organisms in there than there are people on Earth right now. So we're talking, 8 billion. So if there's 8 billion organisms in that piece of soil, the size of a golf ball, how many are there in an acre? You can't even wrap your mind around that. But the point is, who's in control? If you have 8 billion organisms in that little chunk of soil, they're in control. If you don't create good habitat to have that kind of population, and you have very little biological life in your soil, you're going to have to supply a lot of inputs to make up for that, because nobody's in control. It's just an inert system that you have to load up with nutrients and everything else if you're going to hope to get a crop. And we have to remember that soil testing, typical soil testing, was all designed on dysfunctional soil. That was all designed after the soils had already been degraded. And that was all designed on yield response. It had nothing to do with the soil. It's if you put in this many pounds of nitrogen, you get this many bushels of corn. In a dysfunctional system, yes, that's exactly how it works. Once you switch to a biological system, that method, that thinking, doesn't apply anymore. Now you have to find ways to look at the soil and say, all right, I got all this biology there. How are they supplying what needs to be supplied to the plants? And you get to the point where any introduction of fertilizer is a detriment. It screws up the balance of what's going on in the soil, and it actually hurts the biology. It actually prevents the biology from doing what it's supposed to be doing. So, there's a real change in thinking that has to happen there.
Let's talk a little bit about why it is the house, you could say, that biology lives in. That's the easiest way I can say it. Through healthy soil structure, aggregation, that's where the life lives.
So in that lump of soil where we have our 8 billion individual organisms, we don't know how many different species there are. There's thousands. And each one of those organisms, each one of those species has their own niche that they occupy in the soil. They need a certain pore size, they need a certain moisture content, they need a certain structure around them, a certain food supply for them to do their thing. So if you have good, stable soil aggregates, those stable aggregates have a huge diversity of pore sizes, of moisture content, etc., etc. Some of those spaces are aerobic, some are anaerobic, and they all will provide habitat for the multitude of species that are supposed to be living in the soil. Once you crush those aggregates and you return your soil to sand, silt, and clay, now all that is gone. All that habitat is gone. And you make it into a very uniform habitat, which primarily is suitable for bacteria. And that's it. We're supposed to have bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes. We're supposed to have all those things. And now your soil will only harbor a handful of very tough bacteria that can't really do very much for you. They can't, and it's a very limited cadre of organisms to work with plants. So that's why these conventional systems just struggle. And they're designed, with all the inputs, they're designed to be propped up by all these inputs, but then they're also designed to be kept that way. They never get out of that. Where if you get on a path of regenerative agriculture and you restore the aggregates, you restore the biology, now you can get out of that rut and the soil can actually do what it's supposed to be doing, and you don't have to buy all these inputs. I have nothing against fertilizer and pesticides and all that stuff, except as a farmer, the biggest thing I have against those is they cost me too much money. And I don't really need them. So if I can quit spending that money on those inputs, maybe I'll have a decent margin at the end of the year.
Any producer that's working with somebody should look at, right? Yes, we need to rebuild aggregation in our soil. We need to do all those things. Depending on where they're at on that scale, some of them are past, they're in trouble. They're already in the red. They have been, right? Their check engine lights have been flashing for a few years, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes those guys need a little bit more help. And that's where we really look at it and say, okay, we can put these inputs in. But like you said, fertilizers, pesticides, all of these inputs are a direct expense to a farm or to a producer. So we always have people look at it like, hey, is this an investment that's going to be here year after year? Will this stack up over time where I don't have to buy these anymore, but it's helping my soil? And we start to guide people that way and make it look more as like an investment versus a direct expense. Whereas those fertilizers, pesticides, those things, it is to control something. That aggregation, though, is where the biology and the life of the soil lives. And that's what farms are missing. And
they can't go cold turkey because you won't get a yield. You know, if you don't put that fertilizer out there, you're not going to get a yield. So how do we make the things that we need to apply to bridge? We still need to use some fertilizer. We still need to use some of these inputs. But how do we bridge that? How do we make those things more biologically friendly? You know, how do we stop harming the biology while we're trying to get to the biology? So it's to make these inputs more biologically friendly. And then once the soil has the biology that it can do its thing, then we don't need those bridge things anymore. We might need something else. We might not need anything else that other than seed.
You're a master at the 6 principles of soil health. And this really, at the end of the day, for one, is context, right? Why is context the most important principle when you talk about soil health?
I only have 4 principles.
Okay.
The biology of the soil, and I refer to the soil microbiome as all organisms that you can't see without a microscope. And then other times I'll refer to the soil food web, which will include everything, earthworms down to bacteria. So from a disturbance, there's habitat that all the members of the soil food web have. They each have their niche, their habitat that they need. And by eliminating residue, you just eliminated 15-20% of the biology that should be there that lives at the surface in that residue. If you bust the aggregates apart, you lost the habitat for all the other organisms that live below the surface. So that's how tillage is disturbance, is disruptive. Chemical disturbance, it happens in a different way in that it upsets the balance. It upsets the nutrient balance. You apply a whole bunch of nitrogen fertilizer, you just totally change the carbon-nitrogen ratio, you upset the balance, and the plants will take advantage of that for a very short period of time while they're shunning soil biology. And then later in the growing season, when the fertilizer's gone, the plant either took it up or leached or it volatilized or something, it's gone. Now the plants I still need nutrients. Where am I going to get those nutrients from? I don't see any fertilizer laying around. I'm going to have to start feeding these organisms in the soil to start feeding me. Well, by the time that happens, that plant should be looking at yield, not at survival. So now it's putting a lot of energy trying to build relationships that it should have built way back in the beginning. And so we just shot ourselves in the foot by applying that much fertilizer and upsetting that balance. Pesticides, same thing. We don't know what all the different pesticides do to the biology in the soil. Some of those things, there's biology in the soil that use them as food. They'll eat that herbicide, they'll eat that pesticide. And other things, it'll kill a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't even realize. Oh wow, that weed control just killed off all my protozoa. Well, we didn't know that. Nobody studied that. Nobody looked at whether or not the protozoa were happy. They looked at the LD50 for people and all this other thing, but they didn't look at the LD50 for protozoa. And it's oh no, now my protozoa are gone. My nutrient cycling just quit. So there's so much of that we just don't know. Beetles eat a lot of weed seeds. So you want to get rid of weed seeds, you need to have them there because they'll eat a lot of them. The organisms that start to break down residues, that shred them, etc. And I use the phrase, one organism's poop is another one's pasta, because that's how this there isn't one organism that will take a big bite of wheat straw and completely break it down to the final product. It does what it can. The next organism takes that, breaks it down some more, the next one breaks it down some more. So there's this whole cadre of organisms that do that whole job in the soil. The other thing with armor is we may have aggregates that are water stable, that are stable when they get wet. And when I say stable, that means they won't fall apart as long as nobody's beaten on them. But if there's no armor on the soil, these aggregates are getting beaten by raindrops. So they're wet, they're stable, but then they take a hit from a raindrop and busts them apart, just like tillage would. So if we don't have the armor, we could lose aggregates in that regard. And we also lose, like I said, 15% or so of our soil food web that is supposed to be there.
Leave that last pillar that you talked about that's really part of your four is the living roots, correct? Meaning cover cropping. Kind of give us an idea of the role of liquid carbon exudates and keeping the pantry full of those microbes year round, if you would.
So plants, because they can do photosynthesis, and product of photosynthesis is sugar, and then they build higher compounds from that. But they'll use anywhere from a third to a half of the sugars that they manufacture. They will exude through their root systems to feed soil biology. And they can farm soil biology by the kinds of sugars that they put out into the soil. So early on, they say, hey, I need my nitrogen in this form. And so they'll feed the organisms that will bring them that. Later on, I need it in a different form, or hey, I need some phosphorus. It'll feed those organisms that will provide the phosphorus. So they can orchestrate that with those sugars. The other thing is, those sugars are the pathway to get long-lasting carbon in the soil. The residue on the soil surface, and I see that all the time, people, well, you got to have all this residue out there, it'll break down and it'll add organic matter to your soil. Very little of it. Very little of it. That's not how it gets in the soil. It gets in the soil through that liquid carbon pathway of a growing plant, a living plant. That's how that organic matter gets accumulated in the soil. And so it's a thing that people have been misled thinking that it's coming from all this residue breaking down. That residue is mostly respired. So organisms are eating that, and that carbon is going back in the atmosphere as CO2. The carbon that goes down in the soil through the liquid carbon pathway ends up in organisms that die down there, but they don't decompose quickly because there's not a lot of oxygen down there. And it also starts to bind with chemistry in the soil, calcium and some other things, to become more stable. So that liquid carbon pathway is important in that it feeds the biology that then feeds the plant, but it also creates more and more stable carbon in the soil that you can't really get to happen just from residue decomposition on the surface.
Like, what would you look for, Jon, when you see a failing soil system? What are the first lights or the check engine lights that pop on?
If I was going to walk out in a field, not spend a dime, not dig a hole, and just look at the soil from that perspective, do I see a crust on top of the soil, or do I see aggregates? Do I see aggregates protected by residue, or do I see a crust on the soil? If I see a crust on the soil, crust is a tombstone of what was maybe aggregates that got hit by raindrops and disintegrated. So I look at aggregates as probably my biggest one. I can look at soil aggregates and I can learn more about where that soil is at from that than anything else. If those aggregates are there and they're stable, then I know that soil is being fed that liquid carbon from plants to the extent that it's restoring, replacing, regenerating all of the carbon-based glues that hold the aggregates together faster than other organisms are eating them. Because those glues are food for a lot of organisms too. You can't just produce these biologic glues, build aggregates, and then never maintain that, because organisms are constantly eating those aggregates and making them fall apart. So you have to have those living roots, you have to have all of that going all the time to keep that, to sustain that. It's not just a one-shot deal. So soil aggregates would probably be the biggest thing that I could look at. The other thing is if there's water standing out in the field. If that water's not infiltrating, that tells me that you either have poor aggregates or you have poor porosity or both. And you mentioned furrow irrigation, and we start restoring soil health. You can't furrow irrigate anymore. The water won't make it to the other end of the field. It's all going to infiltrate in the first 200 feet. You have to have poor soil health in order for that water to make it to the other end of the field.
What happens when a producer stops intervening with heavy chemical inputs and starts trusting the biological system? There's going to be a withdrawal phase that you're going to have to work through, but what does that transition period look like, Jon?
Generally speaking, if you were in North Dakota, I would say 3 years. You can see some pretty significant changes. 6 or 7 years, you can be pretty well on your way, nutrient cycling wise. And it depends on how much you do to foster good soil habitat. But there's producers now that it's no fertilizer. There's a study that's still going out at the Dickinson Research Extension Center, where I worked part-time after I retired from NRCS. There's a study there. They have a very diverse rotation, no-till, graze it with livestock periodically, etc. And part of the protocol in that study was apply nitrogen based on soil test recommendation. By the time they got to about year 7 or 8, that no longer called for nitrogen fertilizer. So they stopped applying it. And they haven't been applying any fertilizer to those fields, to those plots, since then. So can you get there to where you don't need fertilizer? Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's the payoff. How much money are you spending on fertilizer right now? You just take that out of your budget. You don't need it anymore. Yep. So, yeah, it's there's ways you can get there. It's that 3 years. That's really a leap of faith. That's when you're going through that withdrawal and it's going to hurt. That's when you need to maybe apply very carefully, thoughtfully, apply some biology because you don't have any, and very thoughtfully and carefully apply humic compounds with your fertilizer so that they don't disrupt the biology that you're trying to foster.
Yep.
So we have those products, those things that we can use as a transition to help us get to that third year where, okay, we built it and they came.
Yep.
Now the biology's back. Now I got something to work with here. And you can keep going from there. But yeah, absolutely, that first 3 years can be a little slow going.
ROI of soil health, moving from yield per acre mindsets to profit per acre. This is a big one, I feel like.
Well, it's huge because the yield has been the metric forever.
Yep.
It's the thing everybody talks about, everybody brags about, so on and so forth. And it's a terrible metric. And we need to get away from it. We need to look at the whole system and say, I'm making more money per acre by doing what I'm doing, even though it doesn't look like what all the other conventional fields look like.
Yes.
And for producers to realize that, and like you said, where what they're doing now, putting more and more money into more and more degraded soil, is not, that's not going to pencil out anymore. Sooner or later, you're going to go to the banker and he's going to say no.
Yes.
You don't have enough equity anymore. You're done. So you have to get to that point of understanding that this is the way out of this. And Taylor Henry, where he was talking about subsidy payments, and they referring to him as a bridge. He says, we don't need a bridge, we need an off-ramp. We need a way off of this treadmill that we're on that we can't afford anymore.
That's right. That's exactly right. And once you do switch your mindset from that yield per acre, because everybody wants to hear about the yield champions and who grew the most corn and, who grew the most beans and all this. And it's like, that's great. But let's be honest, we've worked with some giant pumpkin growers even, and I know what they put in to grow one of those pumpkins. And I even look at that, and I mean, I'm talking, small areas, $20,000 in nutrition, things like that. And we're not talking acres, we're talking greenhouse sizes, right? To grow pumpkin. It seems like that's the same principle that you're doing. Like, yes, you have the highest yield and you have the highest cost. So let's really get to the bottom line and look at the ROI and see who wins. And once they can do that, that's when they realize what's important. That is true.
Because the banker doesn't care what your yield is. The banker cares what your margin is. Otherwise, they're not going to lend you money.
That's exactly right. I'll get into a few more questions and we'll close this thing up. Jon, you said that soil is a living organism. If we treated our livestock the way we treat our soil, what would happen to the animals?
We'd probably get a visit from the sheriff. Yeah. I mean, somebody drove by and, your horses are starving to death out there. And so, to think about that you have, at least 2 cows worth of weight of organisms in the soil, and they have to be fed. So if you had 2 cows standing out on that acre, what are they going to get fed every day for a whole year? The thing about the soil, is when we get to winter and things slow down, they don't need as much food. Or there's certain times a year, some of those organisms can go dormant and then come back once a root comes through the soil and wakes them up, or earthworm comes through the soil and wakes them up and feeds them, etc. So they're a lot more forgiving. But you still need to feed those organisms, like I mentioned earlier, just to maintain your aggregates and to keep that carbon stock in the soil that holds aggregates together, provides that backup food, that temporary food when there isn't a living root, those kind of things. So yeah, absolutely. So compost actually, well-made aerobic compost is actually a biologic army. And so if you apply that to the soil, you're applying a whole bunch of biology, plus they each have a lunch pail of food, of carbon. But you need to then put them into an environment where they can continue to be fed by decomposing residue and especially living roots, because that lunch pail will only take them so far. If you put them out on a field and there's nothing out there, there's no living roots, there's no cover or nothing, once that lunch pail is empty, they're all dead or dormant. You could hope that they'd be dormant, but a lot of them are just going to flat
especially
die.
The vegetative ones, right? Those are the ones that die, turn into organic matter, whereas those other ones that are spore forming, they'll be there. They're just in dormancy.
Right. So to use compost that's made from local materials so that your biology is as local as possible, that fits your environment. So to make compost with local materials and then put that out there is a big biological boost if you manage the soil from that point on to be biologically friendly. Otherwise, it's going to be a death sentence to them. And, it was, I won't say a waste of time. You're going to at least still get some nutrients out of it, but you're going to miss your opportunity to really build and diversify the soil biology.
Absolutely. Whereas then those living roots, they're providing exudates. They're actually feeding that biology, helping it grow, helping it multiply. Perfect. How does soil health directly impact the nutrient density of food we eventually eat? And I think this is a big one for you. I know you talk a lot about nutrient density and the importance of it.
And this is something that's relatively new, but what we're learning, and one of the things that really kind of tipped the scale for me was once I understood rhizophagy, where plants will actually take in an entire organism, like a bacteria. So they're not just taking in nitrogen or phosphorus, they're taking in the whole organism into their root, removing part of it and spitting the rest back out into the soil. It's like chocolate covered peanuts. You lick all the chocolate off, you throw the peanut back out, and it gets covered with chocolate again, you eat it again. But where in rhizophagy, now these plants are consuming amino acids, proteins. They're consuming things that they're like, oh man, do you know how much water and energy it would have taken me to build that? And now you're just handing it to me?
It's like dessert.
This is awesome. And so the plant can say, I already have a complex compound. Now I just need to continue to make it an even more complex compound. But it can do that in a growing season, in a short period of time.
Yes.
Where a lot of times plants are still struggling just taking nitrate out of the soil, trying to stay alive and finish out the year.
Absolutely.
And all they have in them is very low, simple sugars, some proteins, etc. But they never are able to make the phytonutrients, the terpenes, the phenols, and a lot of these are aromatic. And, as humans, we're hardwired to sense those things. We grab something to eat and we're like, wow, this carrot smells really good. I want to eat it. Or this carrot has no aroma. It has no flavor. Why should I eat it? And because there's no nutrition in it. It's these higher molecular weight compounds that give us the nutrition that we need. So unless the plant has that biology in the soil to work with, they can't get there.
Absolutely.
They can't get there, especially in a growing season, or the lifespan of that plant or whatever. It's just not going to come out. So we're growing a lot of stuff, we're growing a lot of calories, but we're not growing a lot of nutrients. There's no nutrient density there. A carrot grown in good healthy soil, okay, I can eat one carrot and it'll give me my minimum daily requirement of these 10, 12 different things. If I eat the carrot that was grown in fumigated or unhealthy soil, I'd have to eat the whole bag and I still wouldn't get
Absolutely.
there.
Absolutely. No, and that's exactly right. We joke a lot about it because there's a lot of people that are, even organic farms, whatever it looks like. And the thing is that people have never really focused on the nutrient density of foods. One apple today isn't an apple the way it was 40 years ago or 50 or 60 years ago, right? And that's the big thing. Nutrient density is going to be, I feel like, a big deal, and hopefully someday we see it. And it hasn't happened yet that I know of, but selling produce, selling food on a nutrient density scale in the store. And if it ever gets to that point, what would be very interesting is then you would have to have producers look at the nutrient density, which then leads back to soil health and all those things. They have to grow a healthy crop, or they're going to get nothing for or very little, I should say, a lot less for their crop than somebody that has a nutrient dense crop that's worth a lot more money.
And I think that day is closer than you think, because the technology to measure some of those things is getting easier, is getting simpler. But I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Kittredge. He works with, that's basically what his thing is nutrient density. And I had a chance to visit with him at this last Acres USA Eco-Ag conference. And he told me, he said, I'm convinced that you cannot grow nutrient-dense food unless you have a very well-functioning soil microbiome. And I thought, and I said to him, and I've said to other people, if that's true, then what you just said, Brandon, is exactly true. Where if you cannot show me the nutrient density of what you want me to buy, or if you do and it's way less than this over here, guess where my money's going? So producers who don't understand and implement and get on the path here of restoring their soil health are not going to have anything to sell that people want to buy.
That's right.
They're going to be out of the market. And, that's, you're done.
Yeah, you're cooked. That's it.
You're not growing something that consumers want to buy.
That's right.
Game over.
That's right. And that's what will either force them to maybe make soil health a priority or not, and that's, that could be this huge tipping point. We're starting to see tipping points more and more, but that might be the big one that it's like, well, I can't even, I bought all this, fertilizer, I bought all this stuff. I have the biggest yields out there and I can't sell it, and so that could be, but, what,
no, I think that day's
all right.
coming.
And then I'll get it wrapped up here. A couple just more real important things. In your book, you talk about restoring versus maintaining. Is most American soil currently in a state that can even be maintained at this portion, or is restoration a mandatory first step, would you say?
Restoration is paramount. And the one of the terms that used to be used, still is sustainability. I heard everybody sustainability, and I said, okay, that's fine, but if your soil is degraded and it's not functioning, why would you want to sustain that? You have to restore it to a very high functioning capacity. Then I'm okay with sustaining it. But I don't want to sustain something that's broken, is degraded, is dysfunctional. I don't want to sustain that. I want to restore, and once I restore, then I want to sustain that.
Absolutely.
So that's the difference.
You don't want to just put the car together that has the check engine light on it, right? And just keep putting new tires and new this and new that on it and just hopefully that it gets there. You want to fix the problems, then say, okay, now we can still put tires on it or whatever that looks like.
And the majority of our agricultural soils need to be restored. They need to be regenerated right now before you can start talking about sustainable.
I like it. This is the end part of it. I'm going to close it up. Kind of some rapid fire questions for you. What is the biggest myth? Just quick answers, if you would, Jon. What is the biggest myth in agriculture that you would like to debunk?
That you can't grow crops without fertilizer.
Perfect. It's truthful, and I like it. That is so true. You can do it. If a listener has 10 acres or say 1,000 acres and wants to start tomorrow down this regenerative path or a soil health type of a path, regenerative path, what is the very first thing they should do, Jon?
Educate themselves on what soil health is and how you restore it and how some of these simple ways that you can monitor it to see what's going on.
Perfect. And that one way to do that is absolutely grab Jon's book, A Soil Owner's Manual. That's an important step to that. That's a book that I'll be buying and handing out to a lot of our producers from this point forward as well. So if you would, Jon, let everybody know, all of our listeners, where they can find you at. Best place.
Probably the easiest is just to email. And my email is physicus1 at gmail.com at PHYSICUS, the number 1 at Gmail.
Perfect. Like I said, we thank you a lot, Jon, for being on here today. To all of our listeners out there, if you guys would please, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow the Soil Talks podcast on, when it comes down to it, the Apple podcast listeners, if you guys had listen to these, give our channel 5 stars if you would. Same thing with the Spotify listeners. We have people all over listening to these, and these are very pressing issues that need to be brought to the forefront. And we talk to individuals that are leaders, just like Jon. He's a regular contributor to Ag Daily and Acres USA. You can get his book. I recommend getting his book, A Soil Owner's Manual. Find that book, read it. That's going to tell you a lot about what we spoke about today. And not only that, but at the end of the day, as we move forward through this journey, we've been doing this since 2008. Jon's been doing this way before we have. I think we all have one goal in mind, and that's to restore agricultural land and make the American or any farmer at the end of the day worldwide more profitable. And some have already taken that jump and that leap to do it. But I just want to thank you, Jon. I want to thank you for your knowledge, for your wisdom, for your time being with us today, and being able to speak about this and share this with our listeners and our viewers. And I just look forward to having you on here again, and hopefully we can continue the good fight together and move this thing forward as far as we can.
It's been my pleasure. I hope it's helpful.
Thank you, Jon. You have a great day, okay? All right, thank you.
Too.